Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming to Parish Players. We're here to honor one of our own, a guy who was my friend. When I first came here, I came in 2012 to audition for Blythe Spirit, and I met Janet the first time, and I was wearing a cast on my left foot when I came into audition, which I knew was being removed 3 days later. But that was the first thing she asked me. Is that coming on? It's a very physical play. Anyway, Patrick worked on that play. He was the second assistant stage manager or something along those lines, which is essentially what Patrick did. Whatever we needed done, he would take any job. If the stage manager wasn't there, he was prompting us. And he also produced another play I was in called Under Milkwood. He produced it, and he brought Sophie Wood here, and she was like magic to this play. She made such a wonderful play of Under Milkwood that some of the cast is here. We all love Patrick, and I got to know him a couple of years before we lost him, and I felt robbed. I really did. Hearing all the stories about him, I realized I missed out. I got just a little bit instead of a long time. But he was really fun and a great help to me, and I miss him terribly, and I think we all do. I'm excited about reading these stories. This is our chance to hear Patrick again, and I know we're going to hear him, because he's a very powerful writer. He has this sound, this voice of his that is unmistakable. And all of his friends are here reading, and I haven't totally figured out the order, but I got a few already in mind, and I'll get them all up here. Just want to remind you guys, those are the exits, and please come to Parish Players when we have our events. We are bringing them back soon, I promise you. So I'd like to start off with Pam, Patrick's wife.
I'll just stand. It's interesting, I can't see anybody, but I am just thrilled that this is happening. You know, Pat did not publish his stories, but the way he shared them with the world was to read them. And his dream had been to read his stories. He had a plan to do that, I guess, in Danielle's basement, who had a recording studio. And that was his dream, to record them and to have them sort of recorded in that way. And then when he got diagnosed, his plan was to do that sort of quickly. And I realized that I had a list of the stories he was hoping to do that with, but the cancer just moved way too fast, and that plan did not happen, and it's been a regret of mine that it didn't happen. And so in my house, for years, I've had piles of stories around the house, just waiting to get off the page somehow. And also around the house are notebooks, like this notebook. And in the months and years after Pat died, I'd go to pick up a notebook and find things in there. And I'm not going to read a story, but I'm just going to share one page that I found, because Pat was writing all the time. And this book seemed particularly apt for a couple of reasons. In the back, it's, I think, got the list of the stories that he was hoping to tape, that he was hoping to record. And he also, what would happen is I'd pick up a notebook and there'd be like the list of things he needed to buy at Bob's for the job he was working on, and pictures with measurements of the corner he was going to work on, and then 5 pages later there'd be a story, a piece of a story, which of course I had no idea what story it was part of, but this is what I would find in the months after Pat died. And this book, it has the notes for Under Milkwood. So some of you were in Under Milkwood, a lot of us saw Under Milkwood, and Rod was right. Pat brought Sophie here. He was so thrilled to bring a young person who could, you know, bring that youth and bring that show to this place. But, you know, this is, some of you will appreciate it, the dates when things have to happen, postcards to be mailed, last day for postcards to be mailed, and then, you know, a drawing of the set. Some of you may remember there were a bunch of rooftops, so we've got pictures of the rooftops. This is this, and then you go 5 pages later, 5 pages past that, and then you get a little piece of Pat's writing. So I'm just going to read. When I came across this one, I thought, it's so Pat, you know, in this very short piece, what he could do, the way he could bring you to a place in a moment. He did it here, and so I'm just going to read this, and then we'll go back. It could have been worse, but not by much. She looked over the edge of the roof at the wet spot on the pavement 5 stories below where a balloon had just exploded, and at the police car slowly coming to a halt in front of the building's entrance. "Why did they call the police?" she said, waving her arms. "It was just a fucking water balloon. Laine is such a stuck-up bitch. Can't she take anything?" Laine sat on a stool in the kitchen, amazed more at the fact that the balloon had hit her dead center on her noggin. More than that, more than how much it had hurt. "She's not going to get away with it," Eileen's mother growled as she went to open the door for the 2 policemen. "Thank you. Thank you, officers, for responding so quickly."
Now, Ben, please. Ben Bradley.
This is maybe my first time on stage.
If I go too fast, tell me to slow down.
This piece is called Climbing, and I've edited it because I think there's a lot of readers. I've edited it down sort of the part of it. It's a fairly complicated piece, but I've taken it down to the part that I found the most familiar. And I think it's Pat remembering being 10 or 11 years old in New York. It's hard to stop kicking the machine when money is falling out. Pecky's face lights up when the change clatters on the subway floor. We stuff it in our pockets and ride to the next stop and do it again. The underground is like that. It is like all this space that doesn't belong to anybody. Who cares if you're here, if you're there? No one says, "Hey, get out of here." When we were kicking the ice cream machine, no money came out, but the machine started to go around by itself. We gave out free ice cream and the people took it. The police chase us sometimes or take our names down, whatever name you give them. The first time I gave them my real name, and they actually sent a letter home. Pepe's mother says the cops should mind their own business. And Tom says what his mother says. There is no justice in this world. Pepe screamed at me, "You gave them your real name," and laughed. I hated Pepe then. I felt like I had done everything wrong. For the same reason, climbing got to be popular. Once you get about 10 feet off the ground on the outside of the building where no one can reach you, it feels like nobody owns it. I mean, who uses it? You look at the building, so what? I would be up on the outside of a building and then people would walk right underneath me and not notice me at all. I'd have to yell to get them to look up. Walter's from Romania. Since he's always trying to impress people, he'd climb anything. If there are designs on the outside of the building that I can hold on to, then I know I can climb that building. Walter climbed the big vent pipe to the top of the soda factory. Nobody else could do that. We tried, but there was nothing to hold on to. The other kids thought Walter was crazy. I did too, but they admired him. And that made Walter crazier. He would do things that would really he could really get killed from. I couldn't really be friends with Walter because he didn't sit still. He's always climbing on something or swinging from bars, or he just leaps through the air. When he climbs the streetlights or the no parking signs by his house, his mother comes out yelling, "Walter, Walter!" But he doesn't stop. He says he's Tarzan. So his mother has to yell until he comes down. Then she smacks him on the back of the head. That way she keeps Walter bent over in front of her all the way down the block to their house. But I could tell she liked him. Walter and me climbed together for a while. He was the first person I climbed buildings with. We'd pick out the tallest building on a block and then climb the smaller buildings around it to get to the top. That way there was never a fall more than 2 stories high. We knew how high it would be okay to jump from by jumping off things. First you jump standing up and then go higher until you can only jump from a sitting position. Then go higher until you can only jump by hanging from your hands. Though sometimes you start off hanging from your hands and end up being able to jump standing up. You could increase the height you could jump from that way. You'd know when you were as high as you could go from the way it feels when you hit the ground. There's a container factory on the corner of Knott Street. There are no other buildings around it. It's 5 stories high, and one day Walter and me climbed to the top. What happened was I got to the 3rd floor where there was a bigger ledge than on the other floors, and I started crying because I couldn't get any of the windows open, and I was too scared to go up or down. Walter climbed back down and helped me to the top, practically pushing me. That was because he was afraid of getting caught. I didn't care. I wanted him to go get help. Later in the lot, when we told some other kids, they didn't really believe us, and I didn't want to take them back to show them. But like with Peppy, it's hard to stop kicking the machine when the money's falling out. But the 6 guys that came back with us didn't really care if we climbed the building. They weren't impressed. They didn't want to climb it. It was night now. "Hey, Walter," Carter said. "You really climb this?" "Yeah, man," Walter said proudly. "You stupid Romanian asshole," Carter told him. I didn't want them to make Walter do something stupid so he would fall off the building, so I said, "Hey, we can go up the fire escape. There's a great view." "What, climb all the way back up there?" Carter complained. I climbed up the wall and leapt out to grab the bottom of the fire escape, and wasn't heavy enough to get it to come all the way down. Walter had to pull my legs to get it to come down to the sidewalk. We made so much noise climbing up that Walter looked really worried. Walter did not like getting caught. If he got caught, he would get locked in the house for days. Standing in the street, you couldn't see the courtyard in the middle of the building. About 4 stories down inside the courtyard was another building whose roof was all skylights. Maybe no one would have thought of it if the tiles on the top of the wall that went around the roof were roofs. They were these heavy dark brown tiles about 3 feet long. When I saw what was going to happen, I took off and was about halfway down the fire escape when I heard the first crash. Then they were screaming and laughing up on the roof, and then there was another crash. I hung from the 1st floor fire escape and let go, but because it was dark, I hit the ground sooner than I thought. But I ran as fast as I could, hunched over as low to the ground as I could, trying to be invisible. When I got around the corner, I didn't stick my head out to see what was happening. I kept going, walking a little, running a little because my foot hurt. The next day I was afraid to leave school. I thought the police might be waiting for me at my house or outside of school. School smelled like sour milk. My foot was swollen this morning, so I couldn't tie my shoelaces very tight. When they tried to make me do exercises, I told them I was going to throw up. Sometimes, I'm getting close. Sometimes when my mother is quiet, I can ask her things. Like last night was Sunday, so she was quiet. What happens to people when they kill someone, I asked her. They go to jail for life, or sometimes they get executed. What happens if a kid kills someone, I asked her. Well, sometimes a kid gets taken away to camp in New York, upper New York State. Why? Did you kill someone? No, I heard some kids talking about a kid who had killed someone by accident. He dropped a brick on their head or something like that. Okay. Oh, Jesus Christ, tomorrow's Monday. Go to bed. You have school. You have school, right? I have to get up, right? You're in my bed, I said. I slept on the couch. Oh, yeah, right. Look, honey, go sleep in my bed, all right? Can I just ask one more thing? One more thing, one more thing. How many things are one more thing? She said, holding up a finger. One. Where's Grandma's rosary, I asked. I'd seen it once long ago. It was a piece of the original cross from the Calvary in it. The cross Jesus died on. I could use it. I could buy my freedom with it. It must be worth a lot, I thought. She didn't tell me. She just said, that's the one, now go to bed. I knew where it was anyway and snuck it out of the box that night since I was sleeping in my mother's room. I stayed awake until I heard her snoring on the couch. No one was in front of my house, but I went to the park that Gail came through on her way home from school. When I told her what I had, she got angry and said, no one has that. Yes, I do, I said. My grandfather got it from the Pope. He did. It's very old. I took the rosary out of my pocket. It looked old. The cross was made of dark, black, shiny wood. I showed her how the cross slid open, and then she saw it. A tiny splinter of wood on a white cloth under a piece of glass. Gail was very quiet when she looked. And here on the top of the cross, right here, is a piece of cloth with the saint's blood on it, I told her. If this is real, Gail said, it's one of the holiest things in the world. Until now, I had been extra careful. I wouldn't have even come into the park after school, except I didn't want to be too close to my house. So I didn't see them come up behind me. Two guys in brown uniforms that said AMCO container on them. That's the guy who did it right there, said Carter, pointing and smiling. He's the only one who ran. We would have run and we'd done it. We're not stupid. I jumped around and held out the cross. This is a piece of the original cross, I said. If you touch me, you'll go to hell. That's blasphemy. That's blasphemy, Gail shouted. My mother said she didn't mind the broken windows. What she minded was my taking rosary. There's a whole other part to this is well worth reading. Get your mitts on.
Thank you, Ben. Next, we'll have Laine and Betsy. Do you want to share?
We're going to both stand, and we're going to split the script. So both of us had the pleasure of working with Patrick on Blythe Spirit, and that's also where I met you.
Yes.
And actually, Janet, we enjoyed being directed by Janet, and I'm trying to think, and that's the first time I met Michelle. It was really a great show, and Patrick is just a delight. Somebody said something over there.
Was Mike in there?
Mike's here.
Mike, yes, Dr. Bradford.
Jeannie.
Yes. And Jeannie, that's right, Jeannie Hines. Almost the whole cast is here.
Everybody.
Okay, this one is called First Kiss. They had been summoned. A brown cloaked acolyte led them down a long, narrow, windowless corridor, high enough for giraffes. The corridor ended at a dark wooden door, and there, left alone, they sat opposite each other on hard wooden benches designed to torment old people, and to remind the likes of Tommy and Jamesy, as all things in this place meant to remind them, that comfort led to slouching, and slouching led to disorder, and disorder to chaos, and chaos to Tommy, who stretched his legs out in front of him and leaned his head back against the brown wall. Jamesy leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and hung his head. He stared at Tommy's shoes, squeezing his eyes in and out of focus and listening to the buzz that this made in his ears. Thinking wasn't any more suited to Jamesy than to Tommy, but unbidden images formed in their minds, synchronized because of the bind they shared. They saw, repeated in sequence as if on a multi-image screen, the details of their mother's faces, their gestures, heard the modulation of their mother's voices, all moving from angry to hysterical in reaction to Tommy and Jamesy's changed situation. So they imagined, and weren't feeling so perky now. But they perked up a bit when they saw the spectral figure dressed in black emerge from the office. A thumbs-down guy who could nevertheless, with the slightest gesture of his finger, cause Tommy and Jamesy to sit bolt upright. Father Capua, a humanist in disguise, as Jamesy very much wants to believe, Tommy could tell him nothing doing. Father Capua was traveled the world, who has been to Rome, Africa, and Australia, who, having witnessed the extraordinary diversity of life, concluded simply the world lacked order. On his journey home to Brooklyn, Father Capua took a detour to what had once been ancient Sumeria in search of a hermit renowned for his wisdom. And as tradition would have it, he found him in a cave in a desert. The hermit advised him he had but to name, and the named would become the name. With this pilgrimage under his belt, he arrived back in Brooklyn, a disciple of discipline. It was he who now stood before Tommy and Jamesy. He directed a forlorn glance to each in turn, which annoyed the hell out of Tommy. And then Father Capua, all the while shaking his head slowly, silently handed each an envelope and turned away. "The burden is upon you and all your descendants," he seemed to say. They both knew what the envelope contained. The pink slip, the notice of expulsion. In black letters, no appeals allowed. But Jamesy, ever hopeful of the possibility of justice in the world, inched the notice slowly out of the envelope. "You are doomed," he thought. Father Capua closed the office door behind him. Tommy pointed his finger in Father Capua's direction and accused, "If I go to hell, it will be your fault." Tommy stood up to leave. He said to Jamesy, "I hate head shakers." The imposition of this ritual required also that there be an additional burden. Therefore, this was the only notice anyone would receive. There would be no letters home, cast adrift. Would it have mattered if Tommy and Jamesy knew they had been expelled because they were in truth smarter than they had been taught to believe? Not likely. It was mostly instinct that propelled them and intuition that steered them. So much for their immortal souls. Tommy grabbed one door handle and Jamesy the adjacent one. Together, grunting with the effort, they simultaneously pushed open the thick 12-foot-high wooden doors of this monolithic stone and gargoyle-embellished building. A building that imprisoned the senses and felt like a vault to those who passed by. Tommy and Jamesy pretended to stumble down the granite steps, legs akimbo, into the bright sunshine on Myrtle Avenue. "Whoa, holy shit, man! Is it bright out here or what?" exclaimed Tommy, squinting. They wiggled every part of their body at the stone edifice in mockery and distaste, and sang a discordant ditty about how good they felt, and then fell awkwardly silent when each noticed the other. They stood looking at each other awkwardly, finding themselves on common ground. Jamesy and Tommy had met for the first time 7 years ago in 4th grade, or rather, outside for 4th grade, because Tommy seldom went to school, and had convinced Jamesy to join him. Each noticed the other's handsomeness, the other's cool and swagger, the esteem other boys had for him, the deference other boys naturally gave to him. These things they shared. Tommy was generous in his admiration of Jamesy, as was Jamesy of Tommy. But it was the difference between them that the other desired for his own. So began their circular friendship, full of undermining plots, stealing of allegiances, bribery, trickery, and raw intimidation, all intended to persuade the other to cross the avenue that separated them and be on their side. "Calm down, Mom. It's me who's been expelled, not you," said Jamesy. "Yeah, Ma. Smack me right here," added Tommy, patting his cheek. It was the ma's in their own hearts that they needed to comfort. Holy freaking Toledos! But it didn't seem at all odd to Jamesy or Tommy that neither one had ever met the other's mother. There was Jamesy's mom and Tommy's ma. The intimate point of engagement between them had been the stories they told each other about their mothers. So Jamesy knew that there would be no tears from Tommy's mom. Maybe, and he would be lucky, thought Jamesy. Tommy's ma would smack him as he had invited her to do, and that would be the end of that. Tommy and Jamesy, on the few occasions when they acted together, were inclined to do that instead of this. This being the thing you did instead of that. So, apprehended doing that, they were handcuffed and put into the police cruiser. The cops sat in the front waiting. Tommy knew submission was the better part of valor and crushed Jamesy's foot under his when Jamesy cleared his throat, preparing to protest. So they sat silently as the police debated whether to throw them in the river now or save somebody else the trouble, since that's where they were going to end up in the end. "Oh, right, boys," they challenged. Tommy considered the options and hoped Jamesy would follow suit. Real name, real address. Fake name, fake address. Fake name, real address. That seemed their best bet. These cops were more inclined towards improvised social work than tightening the screws of law enforcement. They took Tommy first, still handcuffed, up to his apartment and left Jamesy in the cruiser unattended. Tommy told Jamesy afterwards that when his ma opened the door only a crack, as she usually did, and when she sized up the situation, had thrown the door open, grabbed Tommy by the shirt, hauled him through the door. "Mind your own business," she yelled at the cop, before slamming the door in their face. "Who the hell do they think they are?" she growled at Tommy. "And how the hell am I supposed to get those off you?" she scoffed, pointing at the handcuffs. "They're plastic, Ma. You can just cut them," Tommy says. Jamesy, in the meantime, had slid out of the cruiser, reasoning, why else would they have left me here alone? And ran like hell. Now Tommy and Jamesy headed down Myrtle Avenue toward the subway as they had been shot into a pinball game, poised at any moment to hit the first bumper, not knowing what hole they'd fall into. It was the time of morning when the city felt like Sunday, a lull in the traffic, the outside workers on break, the stragglers had arrived at work. They walked along Myrtle Avenue, passing from sunlight to shadow to sunlight. Their mood swings randomly from fearful to confident, from somnolent to cocky, like a boat torn loose from its moorings, or like a mentally ill homeless person, like the one they were approaching doing push-ups on the sidewalk. He was one of a group of homeless guys who gathered here every day to wait for the church to open so they could eat. The men stood or sat together in small groups. Some paced or shuffled around alone, looking rather vacantly at the world. Tommy and Jamesy stopped to watch the man doing push-ups. The day was warm, but the man wore a coat, though the sleeves were bunched up at his biceps. "You're gonna be in good shape," said Tommy. "Yeah, you gotta stay healthy," the man growled. "What's that plastic wrapped around you for?" asked Tommy. "What plastic?" Tommy bent over and touched the shredded black plastic wrapped around the guy's midsection. "This plastic," Tommy said. "Oh, that, man. That's to hold me together." Tommy and Jamesy decided to pass on by when a small, sturdily built man stepped out from one of the groups. "Hey, what's your name?" he asked, looking at Jamesy. Jamesy tapped his chest with his fingertips. "Jamesy," he replied. "Jamesy, the man ruminated. "Well, let's see," he commented and continued in a friendly voice. Ah, yeah, you know what I'd like to know, Jamesy? He continued deliberately. You know what I'd like to know? The man became harsh. I'd like to know, and after a brief pause, he clapped his hands loudly and yelled ferociously, "What are you looking at?" Jamesy was about to say, "Nothing, man, I'm not looking at anything," when Tommy stepped up beside him and said, with an emphasis on fucking, "None of your fucking business." Tommy's face had the fine complexion of a boy who had yet to shave, but his hands that now hung heavily at his side were enormous for his size. It was these the man noticed. But how could he know that Tommy liked to practice knocking guys out with his right? "What's your name?" the man asked Tommy in a neutral tone. "None of your fucking business," Tommy repeated, and taking a step forward added, "Do you have a problem with that?" The man shrugged and looked crestfallen and turned away. "I guess we're done here," announced Tommy, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few of the men in the group laughed quietly. When they turned the corner, Jamesy said, "Hey, Tommy, they have food there. They're just homeless guys." "Yeah, we have the guy held together by plastic and the guy who has a problem with his eyes. No thanks." Tommy had advised Jamesy many times, especially when Jamesy was fighting with Tommy, "Don't back away from me. If you do, I'll come after you and knock you out. If they think you're backing down, you're finished," warned Tommy. Jamesy turned so he could walk backwards and look at Tommy. "Are you hungry? That's what they do at the church. They feed people. It doesn't matter who you are. Let's go back and eat." Tommy continued, "It's like a bullfight." "What's like a bullfight?" "What happens if you take your eyes off the bull? Think about it." "Yeah, okay, so I think about it. I thought about it. Then what?" "Nothing," said Jamesy. "Then the bull charges you and you're dead. Or you walk away and the bull charges you and you're dead." "That's bull," said Jamesy. They stood at the subway entrance. They didn't need to talk about which direction to go in, as long as it was the opposite of the usual one. When the train came in, they got in the front car. "Where does this go, do you know?" "Coney Island, maybe. I'm not sure. We'll just take it to the end of the line," Tommy said. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out the front window of the train, watching the tracks speed under them. Jamesy could read. He could be happy in a library. In the 3rd grade, Tommy had confronted Jamesy with the accusation, "You can read?" Like it was a betrayal. Before Jamesy's father left, he read to him all the time, from condensed volumes of classics and popularized history that he displayed proudly on one shelf of the apartment. Occasionally, when they weren't circling each other like predator and prey, Tommy would let Jamesy tell him about things he had read. Jamesy looked at Tommy's profile. "You know about the Cheyenne?" Jamesy asked. "Cayenne pepper," answered Tommy, who was intolerant of his own ignorance.
The Cheyenne were Plains Indians. They lived on the Great Plains. They were nomadic. They had teepees. "Oh, yeah, right," Tommy said in recognition. If one of them committed a crime, did something to offend the tribe, they weren't imprisoned or hung by the neck until dead. They were banished, expelled from the tribe, but they were free. The other thing, no other tribe, if they happened to come across any, would take them in, except maybe as slaves. "Oh, so we'll be slaves, is that it?" Tommy said. "Just popped into my head," answered Jamesy. "Like gypsies, like the gypsies," said Tommy. "What are you talking about?" laughed Jamesy. "You don't know any gypsies, do you?" "The gypsies, right? They were like the Cheyenne, right? They wander around, so I know gypsies," replied Tommy. "A gypsy girl got in a taxi with me and Mom once." Tommy paused. "Man, you want to sit down? I'm kind of tired of standing." They sat in the seat opposite the engineer's compartment. "Anyway, me and Mom were coming home from the hospital. My father, they found him unconscious. Drinking, you know, no big deal. But they should have left the bastard on the street. It was a big hospital way the fuck over on East Side. No subways nearby. Mom was really tired, so we called a cab. She still had to go to work that night. And then this girl jumps in the cab with us. She looked maybe a little younger than me. She jumps in with a rose in her hand. She sticks the rose in my face and she says to me, $5. I'm gonna have $5. She had black hair like my mom's. Mom ordered her. She said, get out of the cab. $5, the girl says, trying to get Ma to take the rose. I tell the cabbie, she's not with us. But he just sits there and looks at us in the mirror and doesn't say a word. I don't want your damn flower, Ma said. Now get out of the cab or I'll throw you out. $5, the girl says again. This time, Ma looks like they're gonna pop out of her head. So I try to push the girl out the door, but she grabs onto the partition. Then the driver yells, close the door and get out of the cab, like there was just me and Ma back there. Now the girl starts saying over and over again, $5, $5, $5. I look at Ma, well, what should we do? The girl was kind of pretty, but I thought, go ahead and belt her, Ma.
Oh.
Ma leaned forward, and the girl leaned in close to her face, and in almost a whisper said, $5. That was it. The cabbie screams, get out of my cab! But Ma had been feeling around in her pocket. She pulled the girl's arm off the partition so hard the girl looked like she was really scared. And then Ma stuffed the $5 into her hand and said, get out of here! And the girl said, the girl was gone like that, concluded Tommy, snapping his finger, with the rose. That's a gypsy, said Jamesy. Yeah, the cat told us. It happens all the time in that neighborhood. He just tries to ignore it. Oh, I guess, said Jamesy. The cabbie said, Tommy explained, that the gypsies send the kids out for money, you know, to beg or steal or whatever. And if they don't come home with enough money, bam, knuckle sandwich. And you believe that? Said Jamesy. I saw it with my own eyes. Anyway, I don't care, said Tommy. Meaning, he didn't care if it was true or not. Jamesy knew what it meant. They rode along in silence. Their legs stretched out in front of them, their arms folded across their chests. Jamesy turned his head toward Tommy. Hey, Tommy, what's your mom's name? I don't know, replied Tommy. He went on before Jamesy could protest. I know what her name is, but I don't really know because I never hear it. When my father was around, he called her Boobs. And when my aunt, when she comes over, she hasn't come over in a while, calls her BJ. Her real name is Betty Jane. Sounds funny to say it. I told you mine, now you tell me yours, said Tommy. Jamesy was silent as he pronounced his mother's name to himself. See what I mean? Weird, huh? My mother's name is Claudia. They sit quietly, the subway train pulls into the station. When the doors open, Jamesy asks Tommy, what does your mother look like? Tommy jumps up and he looks disgusted. What, you fucking crazy or something? Forget it, began Jamesy, but was interrupted by the engineer as he came out of his compartment. Last stop, he announced. End of the line. They emerge into the sunlight block from the boardwalk, Coney Island. Even Tommy, a denizen of concrete, felt uplifted by the scent of the sea. They run neck and neck until they reach the boardwalk. The sky was noisy with jets. The beach dotted with trash cans. Freighters moved along the horizon, and the stone jetties calmed down the ocean breakers. Still, Jamesy was able to stand at the boardwalk's railing and see himself as a Cheyenne standing alone at the edge of the wilderness, breathing in the scent of freedom. Tommy interrupted his reverie. Mostly old people here, he said, sounding disappointed. Mostly old people live here, it looks like, said Jamesy, surveying the boardwalk from left to right. A few groups of 2 or 3 sat scattered among benches, but it looked like there was a preference for walking alone. Tommy and Jamesy, with untutored stops, danced along the boardwalk, and the old people shuffled unnecessarily to the side, cautious to avoid a collision with youth. A man haltingly cantered toward them, the flap of his underarms jiggling. Jamesy, glimpsing Tommy's twisted smile, slapped his shoulder. Don't you book that guy. He's just trying to get some exercise. I was just going to run alongside of him, get him out, get his heart rate going. That's cruel. It's not cool, they're old people. Hey, how much money you got? I'm getting hungry, Tommy said. But Jamesy didn't answer. He was thinking, did my father tell me that about the Eskimos? That when they got too old to take care of themselves, they would go out and lie down on an ice floe and flow out to sea? He imagined Father Kapua standing on the beach with his arms raised above the sea, while all the old people walked toward the ice floes. But they were all wearing shorts and t-shirts. Hungry man, hungry, Tommy's voice in his ear. I've got $7. How much do you have? Asked Jamesy. Not enough, Tommy answered. At first, their exuberance earned them a get away from me. Don't you go to school? And from one woman hiding her cell phone like a cross to ward off evil, I'm calling the cops. Shit, this isn't working, Jamesy said. Let's regroup, Tommy said confidently. I know how to do this. Yeah, right. Like, give me your fucking money. That'll get us more money. The magic words had never come easily to Tommy. His only sojourn at childcare had been a short-lived program in the basement of the neighborhood church, when the teacher had bent over Tommy and asked in a saccharine voice, "And what's the magic word?" Tommy had replied with joyful abandon, "Fuck and fuck, 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 fuck." "Aren't you a piece of work?" she said, shaking her head, and that was that. Expelled. First time like a charm. Tommy found himself at home in the kitchen watching his father drink rye. But now, polite humility, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you, and lies proved so successful that in addition to all the food they could eat, Tommy and Jamesy were now able to buy 2 huge feathered hats. The day had worn on the old people, and they were gradually being replaced by kids as the schools let out. Tommy watched as a small group began to gather along the boardwalk, and he knew it was time to go. The subway was crowded now, but they found a seat together at the end of the car. They both sat down in the seat until their knees pressed against the seat in front of them and let the sounds of the train rushing through the tunnel enclose them like a cocoon. Tommy let his head tilt over slowly toward Jamesy until it rested on Jamesy's shoulder. Jamesy shuddered slightly but didn't move. No one has ever done that before. Jamesy closed his eyes. At first he felt uncomfortable, and then comfortable, but strange. Tommy lifted his head and said quietly to Jamesy, "Has a girl ever kissed you on the neck?" Jamesy shook his head. No, why? "I'll show you how a girl kisses you on the neck." Tommy put one knee on the seat and pushed Jamesy's head a little to the side. He leaned over slowly on the seat and put his lips deliberately but softly on Jamesy's exposed neck and began to gently suck. Jamesy's entire being vanished except for the tingling that started in his neck and spread through his whole body. Tommy slid back down next to Jamesy. "Something, huh?" he said to Jamesy. "You want to try it on me?" Jamesy, who felt a little dazed from Tommy's kiss, thought, "Well, I guess I owe it to him." "Okay," he said, and got up on both knees and held his head out in front of his hands out in front of him as if he was going to catch a frog. Are you ready? Asked Jamesy. Just do it already, said Tommy, leaning his head to the side. Jamesy closed his eyes. He lowered his head as soon as his mouth made contact and began to suck. Tommy lurched back against the seat, screaming and laughing simultaneously. What the fuck are you doing? Said Tommy, leaning his head to the side. Tommy's eyes were angry, although he was smiling. That's going to put a mark on my neck. Jamesy looks embarrassed. They both look away from each other and return their knees to the up position. Stop, man. Come on, stop. Jamesy opens his eyes to see Tommy standing at the car's open doors. Half asleep, he runs for the opening as the doors begin to close. Tommy keeps one of the doors from closing. On the platform, Jamesy tries to orient himself. Where are we? Where do you think we are, says Tommy. Oh yeah, Jamesy says, looking at the big white letters on a purple background, Bliss Street. Dusk now. They stand on the subway platform. The glow of the street and the store lights below blends within the last rays of the setting sun. Jamesy watches as the sky's last thin strip of ethereal blue becomes the night. Tommy looks disgustedly at his hat in one hand and most of the feathers in the other. What a piece of shit, he whispers.
Jim Schley.
I was in that legendary, exhilarating Under Milkwood with Patrick. But I have a much earlier memory. Pam, you'll remember this. You and Pat were playing music at Betsy Edmonds' house. And were you housemates there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Patrick read, this would have been maybe 82, 83, somewhere in there.
87, 88.
Okay, so 5 years later than I'm remembering. But I never knew. I had known Patrick some time at that point, but I didn't know he wrote stories. And that evening he also read a couple of stories, including that climbing on the fence. So this one's called Jasmine. And Jasmine is the mother of Kathy and Rachel, who go to preschool or a daycare center, and their teacher is Rebecca, and I think that will orient you. Jasmine, I love you. Wake up, Jasmine. She reached over and pushed the off button on her self-made recording. Every few days, Jasmine changed everything but the 6 words. She played word jazz so that each weekday morning at 6 a.m., her voice invited her into the conscious world, sometimes with low-pitched intensity, at other times with hysterical ardor. This morning, her voice spoke to her in a simple, declarative monotone. Jasmine, I love you. Wake up, Jasmine. The recording in her children's room differed only in the use of their names, Kathy and Rachel. The rays of the early morning sun shone directly into Jasmine's bedroom. By focusing on the illuminated dust particles in the air, Jasmine caused the rest of the room to recede into hazy obscurity. She lay motionless, letting gravity pull her arm off the edge of the bed, and watched, with a growing revelation, the eddies created by the dust particles. This unbidden revelation, seemingly caused by a random configuration of sensory events, Jasmine would not allow to interfere with her intended course of action. She whumped the bed so that the phantom picture appearing in the eddies vanished. Still, she stared at the afterimage and exhaled in resignation as she closed her eyes to see the memory. Mrs. B, that's what most people in the neighborhood called her mother. And somewhere around 12 years old, Jasmine started to call her Mrs. B too. Mrs. B, that crazy old lady. The most likely times for Jasmine to experience her mother's presence were Saturday mornings when her mother cleaned and the dust would get all stirred up. Mrs. B just used a broom brushing the dust in clouds from one part of the house to another. Those quiet Saturday mornings when the sunlight and the incandescent light combined into a strange glow through which Jasmine twirled her body, stopping to watch the forms curl over themselves. On one of those Saturday mornings, as Jasmine spun, the dust became mixed with a gray smoke, more dense than could be from her mother's cigarettes. Jasmine had flapped her arms in helpless terror as she watched her mother, who refused to leave the house, refused to call the fire department or to call for any help, burning her hands trying to swat out the fire that had spread from the top of the stove to the curtains. The fire threatened to consume the whole kitchen until an anonymous neighbor, who had seen Mrs. B from across the courtyard, burst in with a fire extinguisher. From the earliest age, Mrs. B had warned Jasmine about the dangers of having contact with people in uniform and the amorphous authority they represented. Anyone official, and that could include plumbers, was suspect. They could report what they had seen or didn't see, same difference. Jasmine would do almost anything to avoid having to see the mad anxiety that appeared in Mrs. B's eyes whenever Jasmine appeared to doubt Mrs. B's admonitions. She agreed, in the interest of expediency with the other kids, that Mrs. B was a crazy old lady, and explanations would tax an already short supply of tolerance. Though she was not old, but the old seemed to explain her madness, Jasmine was stoic in her embarrassment. She told simply the reason why she was forbidden to play in the park, because of the fence and gates which could be closed to prevent escape. A prison, but really Jasmine had to say, she thinks it's a prison. And then the men in the brown uniforms will take you, she told them, away or into the stone house to do dreadful things. The kids did not try to reason with her. The fence is to keep people out. But fences meant only one thing to Mrs. B, and Jasmine shrugged it off. She's just a crazy old lady. But Jasmine crossed the street when the sanitation men were collecting garbage, and she had vomited on the stairs when the class descended to board the buses for the trip to the fire department. As Jasmine lay on the bed, she felt time like a cleaver cut through the present, and watched as the space in the room was cut into enormous sheets of transparent paper. She pondered how to arrange these kite-like pages until Rachel interrupted her by announcing, "I'm not going to daycare today." "You're not?" "Jeremiah's been hitting me." "Jeremiah's been hitting you? I'm sure if you told Jeremiah how you felt." "I told Jeremiah." "There's no hitting in daycare." "No, but Jeremiah's been hitting you." "Jeremiah's been hitting me." "So there is hitting at daycare." There's not hitting at daycare." "Do you scream that loud at Jeremiah?" "Yes." "Don't look so stricken, Rachel. No one should hit you. I agree. I don't want Jeremiah to hit you. Please, try to get dressed." "I'm not going to daycare." So there's no break here, but I'm suspecting there's a little break because now it shifts to the perspective of Rebecca. Rebecca called the window at which she stood the watching window or the bye-bye window. And sometimes she thought of it as Rebecca's window because it was from this window she had been watching the children arrive with their parents for the past 3 years. She reveled in the watching. She savored her discreet observation of intimate moments or terrible struggles as children were helped, bribed, or coerced from vehicles by the invisible hand of temporal society. This morning, Rebecca awoke, as she usually did, groaning under the visibility of light. Now she stood at her window, half concealed by the shadows in the room, as was her habit, and watched as Jasmine parked directly beneath her. Jasmine arrived first, almost without exception, 5 days a week. She was usually there before the center opened. On warm days, she walked in the grass with her children. Today, they sat in the car, waiting. Rebecca watched. This had been the daily scene over the last year. Jasmine never looked up. Today, she did. Rebecca liked to feel like an invisible casual observer, so when someone looked up, she held their eyes for a moment and then waved as she withdrew further into the room. Today, Jasmine looked up. Rebecca did not withdraw into the room until Jasmine bent her head as she opened the car doors, sometimes intimating in her directness, but always without an edge. Rebecca speaks plainly. But it is reassuring to Rebecca to know that things half-seen or merely hinted at can feel fearfully chaotic in their undiscovered state. Over the last year, her gratification increased proportionally to the obscurity, the clearly created obscurity of her almost entirely nonverbal and brief communications with Jasmine. Rebecca looked down at the grooves her fingernails had gouged over time in the pine windowsill. Sometimes the children will study the grooves as they waited on a chair to wave goodbye to their parents. Rebecca stood behind them. They would ask, "What's this a picture of?" Rebecca did not, out of principle, give her adult interpretation of things to the children. But in answer to this question, she would sometimes mumble, "Black pits, the rivers of time, bare scratches in the wood." Then she would have to nudge the kids, those who had been at daycare a while, to look up and wave to their parents, who were waving furiously from their cars. For God's sake, Rebecca thought, you wouldn't want them to feel neglected. The calm attention Rebecca paid to Jasmine's brief presences encouraged Jasmine. Though Jasmine naturally caused people to become alert and watchful when she came into a room. At the daycare, she compounded this by rejecting ritual entirely. She never showed even a cosmetic smile. She walked with an austere haughtiness that expressed her sentiments. "How dare you greet me as if I liked leaving my children? You actually believe this is a fun place to be?" But she accomplished this with such physical grace that only Gertrude, the cook, could manage to say, "What a cold, nasty bitch." After the first few weeks that Kathy and Rachel were at daycare, Jasmine began leaving by other doors and procrastinated her departure from the center on the chance of meeting Rebecca. After a few months, Rebecca was certain of this, though they rarely said much more than hello. Jasmine appeared to shed some of her aloofness, even the appearance of regal height, as she walked across the ABC room, her children's hands in each of hers. "Expected but unexpected," said Rebecca. "Why? I bring them every day." Rebecca didn't need to say, "Yes, but to Carmen, to the LMNOP room." Instead, she gave the standard greeting to Kathy and Rachel, saying something nice about each, and watched Jasmine walk with measured steps out the door. "Do you want to wave? Rachel, Kathy?" They dutifully stepped onto the low bench and waved without enthusiasm as Jasmine backed onto the road and drove off. Rebecca, with kind words and a hand on each shoulder, guided Rachel and Kathy towards the LMNOP room. They walked past the kitchen. Gertrude, the cook, studied Rebecca's face for some sign of internal misery. The more detected, the more enlivened Gertrude's day would be. She would become nearly ecstatic when some poor teacher had been driven into the kitchen and to tears by the mechanizations of 15 preschoolers. Rebecca, seeing Gertrude's beaming face, said, "Great day, isn't it? The best. I mean, really, one of the best." And watched a trace of grimness return to the corners of Gertrude's mouth. Here in this place, where boundaries are precisely defined, lines of all kinds defining property of all sorts, Rebecca saw a sheet of glass dropped on a marble floor. She sat alone in the evenings, her hands often wrapped around the bowl of a pipe stuffed with marijuana, laughing sardonically at herself. In Africa, with her missionary parents, she had awakened purposefully before dawn to watch the sun rise over the plains. "I can appreciate the idea of all things in their proper place," Rebecca said to Carmen as they sat on the oak window seat 5 minutes before closing, with Kathy and Rachel, the only children left. Yeah, well, I really didn't ask, but an orderly space does give you an orderly child, answered Carmen. Rebecca did not express her opinion about things that meant something to her. So she didn't explain to Carmen that she was thinking about Africa and how, at least in the bush, each thing and creature had a proper place. Here, she believed everything had a place, but none of them were proper. Certainly is becoming, there's something a little awry here. Certainly something is becoming orderly around here, agreed Rebecca, thinking of the old climbing structure with its rusted bolts and old tires built by parents, replaced now by a plastic village of primary colors. The old fence of rotting wood replaced by a hurricane fence. Cool, the kids love it. Carmen, it's 6 o'clock. Why don't you go home? I'll wait here with Kathy and Rachel. I'd like to, but procedure. 2 people need to stay, and it makes sense. Well, hang in there, kids. I'll call your mom. Find out what the story is. At 5 minutes before closing, it occurred to Rebecca, through a wave of nauseous excitement, that Jasmine might not come. If Jasmine doesn't come, Rebecca believed, it won't be because she had a car accident, was late, got her signals crossed. She'd never failed to pick up Kathy and Rachel. It will be because she decided not to come. There was no answer at Jasmine's home or work. Carmen looked questioningly into Rebecca's exceedingly round face that no longer appeared benevolent and trusting. A cold distance like a full moon in winter was in it. Go home, Carmen, she said with finality. I spoke with Jasmine. There's a problem, and I'll take Kathy and Rachel home. Rachel and Kathy became very still. Their silence seemed to reach out and change the familiar surroundings into something strange. There showed no recognition, and that they understood as Rebecca repeated to them what she'd said to Carmen with some attempt at warmth, adding, supper, and then maybe, yeah, later, we'll figure it out, exactly when we get to my house. Rebecca imagined Jasmine arriving at the darkened building and stopped the car. She said, stupid. Where's Mom? Asked Kathy. Actually, I don't really know. I mean, she added, hearing Rachel's breath tremble with the effort to suppress the expression of her anxiety. We will see Jasmine later, after supper. I'm just not sure what came up exactly, so your mom will have to tell us later. She restarted the car. Rebecca debated with herself how much she should tell Amy. Pediatric special care had reinforced to an exceptional degree Amy's talent of going from point A to B. Jasmine, as she unfastened Kathy and Rachel's seatbelts, knew exactly where she was from moment to moment, but had no idea where she would be. Though it would be a relief to hear Amy say, this is point B, go there. She was relieved, though, to see that Amy's car was in the driveway as she got home. She felt to rely on Amy's somewhat harsh common sense would be a betrayal. But of what? What if she is dead? Amy questioned Rebecca severely. How do you know? How do you know? Your imagination, your speculation, your instincts, they're not relevant here. I mean, for God's sake, Rebecca, you kidnapped, abducted 2 children. What's the difference between you and the woman who walks out of the shopping mall with somebody else's because she wants a kid? No difference, sweetie. And I'm an accomplice. An accomplice. Could you lower your voice, please? Rebecca pulled Amy into the bathroom and turned on the fan. I know this is utterly and profoundly serious. There's a person who's missing here, unaccounted for, or maybe just waiting, if you're lucky. But faith, a kind of faith, that's what's needed, for a short time. Sure, okay, what's the big deal? She drops the kids off, doesn't come back. Happens all the time. No. In 1 half hour exactly, I'm calling the police, if you don't. Right now, I'll do you a favor. I'll call Gail at the hospital to find out if Jasmine's been admitted. Jasmine sat in her car in the parking lot of the VFW's lounge off Route 2, 30 miles from her children. Spook dangled from its gold chain as she held it with a rock-steady hand before her eyes. The dull neon lights of the lounge reflected in the clear, teardrop-shaped quartz. A car's headlights pierced the darkness of Jasmine's car, and Spook began to swing violently from side to side. Jasmine caught him in the palm of her empty hand and whispered, "Spook, that isn't helpful. I know you don't like those lights in your interstices, but let's try again." She climbed into the back seat and sat in meditative position with Spook suspended, just above her lap. Jasmine concentrated. Spook moved ever so slightly that she felt the motion more than observed it. She returned him to his felt bag and got out of the car and went to the telephone. When Rebecca answered the phone, Jasmine said, "My name isn't Jasmine, you know. I mean, it is Jasmine, but my mother named me Martha." Rebecca ignored this. "So you just abandoned them?" "You know I didn't abandon them. I left them with you." "Why do you think I have your children?" "Because I asked Spook." "Who or what is Spook?" "A crystal pendulum on a chain. Go to my house," Jasmine gave directions, "and at the bottom of the bush, on the left, in a small box, is the key. Kathy and Rachel will be quite different, you'll see, when they are at home." Jasmine hung up before Rebecca could say, "You know, this is more words than we have ever spoken to each other." She called to Kathy and Rachel and told them, "That was your mother herself. She can't talk now, but we are going home." "Your mom, do you know a Spook?" "Oh yeah, Spook," said Kathy. "Well, your mom's in conference with Spook, and we're going home. That is, I'm going to your house. You're going home." "You know, Rebecca, I see this delight or satisfaction, whatever good feeling you're trying to conceal, but this is still pretty serious. This woman is driving around conversing with a rock." That must be Amy speaking. The silence that had predominated between Rachel and Kathy dissipated on the ride home in an enthusiasm for supper. They explained to Rebecca all the things that were in the house to eat, where they were kept, and what you could do with them. When Rebecca answered their question, "Where was Mom?" with the same, "Actually, I don't know," they told her she was with Spook. Rebecca couldn't sleep. She sat anxiously by the phone until after 1 a.m. Then went into Jasmine's bedroom, which had a connecting door to Rachel and Kathy's, and fell face first onto the bed, and did this many times before she lay still. "Rebecca, I love you. Wake up, Rebecca." Kathy watched Rebecca's startled ascent into consciousness from the bottom of the bed, where she sat with her legs tucked under her. "We have a recording like that in our room, too."
Are there any intermissions?
No, I thought we'd just crack through. How long are we going?
I don't know. That's my question, I think. I need to stretch.
Would everyone
I think there's quite a ways to go. Maybe my English is right. You know, I don't think we even.
It's up to you.
Let's do Michelle and then do a break.
Yeah, we'll do a break after Michelle.
Do a shit.
Zane, here it is.
I also met Pat as a cast member of Light Spirit, and I fell in love with him, as everybody did, in that cast and crew. But my favorite memories from him are actually from when he came to my classroom. I'm a middle school English teacher, and so Pat and I really connected about stories and writing, and he came to my class, and he spent the day at school, and he told the kids all about his writing process, and he shared some stories with them, and he wrote with them, and they fell in love with him too. And so my favorite memories are actually not from the theater, but from when he was hanging out in my classroom with me all day. And what I miss most about him is his laugh. This is called The Token. But Jimmy wasn't thinking, "You're not a killer," or reciting to himself the euphemisms, "You could be a warrior." a citizen, a soldier, a patriot, a defender. That argument he was leaving behind. Walking under the L, Jimmy was letting go of thinking. It was twilight and the trains overhead filled the evening air with the screech of metal on metal as they rounded the sharp turn and headed toward the tunnel under the East River. There was bustle all around as people headed home from their jobs, and Jimmy just walked right in the middle of it, the anonymity of it all encasing him in a protective cocoon. You have to be somebody walking in there, Jimmy told himself. Whoever I am to me, that's who they'll see. As he passed by the diner, he looked to see who was eating and saw his image scattered by the passing car's headlights in the diner's windows. And what Jimmy saw kicked in a bit of confidence. Strong, handsome, even important looking. His back actually straightened up a bit. Jimmy didn't notice the trousers that were too worn and big hair, a little greasy, pale complexion, tired. Youth wears its own elegance, and that's what Jimmy sees. 2 elevators on his left and 2 on his right as he entered the lobby through the double glass doors. A mirror straight ahead needed to be cleaned, and the brown and green walls discouraged animation. The old vinyl flooring had lost its sheen, and one of the overhead fluorescent lights was buzzing and flickering. Somewhat disconcerting to be standing in this oppressively dull space alone, Jimmy half-consciously found what felt like the center of the room and paused there to become acclimated to this environment. Another kid came in, quickly followed by a second, and a woman, who Jimmy assumed was his mother. No one acknowledged the other's presence. There was no solidarity here. The big glumpy kid pushed the elevator button. The door opened immediately, and they all shuffled in. They entered the waiting room, which was packed. The wooden benches along 3 of the walls were full. On the 4th side of the rectangle, 4 secretaries were separated from the waiting room by a half wall, the top of which was a counter. The woman at the nearest desk said, without looking up, "Check in." Jimmy sauntered up to the counter and rested his arm on it, as if he were about to order a scotch. "Name?" asked the woman. Jimmy felt almost embarrassed to say it out loud in a crowded room, though he recognized no one. "Do you have the letter with the appointment date?" she went on, without looking at him. Jimmy held the letter out towards her. "Put it on the counter, please. Take a seat." He stepped back, and the woman who had accompanied her son stepped up and said with a strong accent, "We forgot it." The woman ignored the gesture towards her son to approach and asked for his name. Though there were no seats, the woman said again, "Take a seat." This was a large, densely populated blue-collar neighborhood that had one of the highest quotas to fill in the country. Jimmy guessed looking around the room that he was the only CO there, and as far as he knew, the only one in the entire district. After the last arrival was checked in, Jimmy watched as a second woman carried papers through a frosted glass door. Jimmy craned his neck, but couldn't get a glimpse inside before the door closed. The woman came back out, followed by an officer in uniform. "James Laine," the officer announced. "What?" exclaimed Jimmy to himself. "I just got here." Not getting an immediate response, the officer repeated, "James Laine." Jimmy approached the counter. The officer swung the half door open and commanded, "Follow me," leading Jimmy through the frosted glass door. There was a buzz of mumbling and squirming in response to Jimmy going to the head of the line. "I'm Captain William Moreland," the officer said, holding out his hand to Jimmy. "This is a wholly civilian hearing. I'm here to observe." He led Jimmy to a long metal and formica table, around which sat 8 men, 4 on each side. One closest to the head of the table gestured for Jimmy to take a seat there. All things considered, thought Jimmy, I'm important. And his confidence surprisingly went up a few notches. As Jimmy sat down, the man continued in a voice almost jovial sounding. "What do we call you? James? Jimmy? A nickname?" He then went on to explain, as if he were selling a car, why this would be a fair and impartial hearing. What Jimmy's rights were, and off they went around the table counterclockwise, each taking turns, and asked Jimmy to explain and defend or to justify to this group why they should believe what Jimmy said. Each approached it differently. So far, no surprises. The questions were ones he had familiarized himself with. Are you a coward? All the players seemed to be following the same script. The Central Committee for Conscientious Objectors had been accurate, proving Jimmy's skepticism misplaced, but still. What would you do if a man broke into your house and was going to rape and kill your mother? Asked man 5, going around the table. Have a better chance of catching me if you asked, what would I do if he was going to rape and kill me? Jimmy had read they would ask him exactly this question, but he pushed it aside, thinking it was just going to be rhetorical. What's really the point of this question? If I say I'll kill him, then you're in the army now. If I say God has said I don't know, the result would be that my mother is raped and killed, and I'm a fucking coward and a wimp, and I'm disgusting. So Jimmy said, it's hypothetical. I've never had that happen. I don't know what I would do. And he thought back to David down on Lafayette Street. Really, he just wanted me to stand up and tell these guys, I'm not going because it's wrong, and off to jail I go. The man said, feigning shocked surprise, you would let him rape your mother? Jimmy really wanted to get his mother out of this conversation. But he couldn't get his teeth into his thoughts. And he blurted out, I never really thought about it. I would want to persuade him to change his mind. It's hypothetical. Jimmy had to leave that door open. That was the power of his objection to him. The door to violence is always open. Jimmy looks around the table. None of these guys look like they are out to get him. There's a weariness in their aspect. He wants them to know, to believe, he, Jimmy, is one of them, grew up like them, believes like them. Jimmy wants them to see him as part of their tribe. Otherwise, Jimmy concludes, nothing will change. That's what taking it to the village square really means. A voice interrupts his thoughts. We're done here. You'll receive a letter in the mail in a month or so. Jimmy got up and felt he should say thank you and shake their hands, but strongly suspected they really were from different tribes. Indeed, a month later in the mail, a formal rejection of his appeal and an order to appear for induction on July 28th. Next appeal to the state board, submit a thesis on God and man, wait until 10 minutes before the deadline to have it postmarked at the Central Post Office on 34th Street, and then comes a notice of a second hearing at which Jimmy is entitled to be accompanied by his lawyer or a clergy member. Jimmy decides out of necessity he doesn't have a lawyer, or even know a lawyer, or a clergy that would be a priest. He'll go it alone. If his parents knew, he thinks this is the best strategy, but also believes that there is no one who can accurately represent him. When he arrives at the draft board a second time, the waiting room is empty, and he is greeted by Captain Weaver, an Army lawyer who advises Jimmy that he is here to make sure Jimmy's appeal is fairly and accurately handled. What this captain needs to believe is that Jimmy is sincere, that his position rests on faith, and it is faith, the presence or absence of it, that Jimmy has spent the last 2 months thinking about. What does it mean to have faith? To believe when God is just a configuration of fear and need and want. And at the center of it all is me, besides Jimmy. It's me I believe in. All those years of religion, of holy holies, of catechism and penance, and the fear of hell. Here's Jimmy before he goes up in the elevator, walking back and forth and pounding his fist in his hand, thinking out loud. Comes down to the same thing all the time. This is where I end up. You can't make me kill anyone. I won't kill anyone. And what's so fucking hard about all of this is that there really is no right or wrong. They contradict one another. They cancel each other out. What's left is me and you. If we kill each other, that's the end. And that's what I'm afraid of, the end. Jimmy shakes his head. I just don't feel like killing anybody. I don't want to go down that road.
Wow.
Thank you for coming back in. We're going to do just a little bit at the end here because we're recording and we want to record what we can today. Thank you, Daly. It's going to start us up. Sure.
Thanks. This is, there were a lot of snippets. This might be one or it might be actually a finished piece. You can decide for yourself. But before I start, I want to just share a brief Pat story. I hadn't known Pat that long. My husband had known him longer. Like we were in the process of building a house, and we built this little house, but like not finished anywhere near. There's just drywall up, and I was 7 months pregnant. We were living in 2 little rooms. The top of the house, it was miserable, hovel-like. And Pat, we had this drywall that would have to be plastered. And we had no idea how to do this. And Pat said, I'm going to give you a day. Have all the materials ready. Go do the ceiling. Because that was the most intimidating thing. Because once you started, you had to go all the way. And it was basically one room, place. A nightmare, right? He came. We did it. I hauled water all day long, up and down those stairs. And he wouldn't take any money, but he did say, I'll have some ice cream. So we had ice cream. So then, every time we look at the ceiling, here's Pat. So this is called basement. Coming up from downstairs, bring a little bit of myself up each time. The associations we have with basements are usually not pleasant ones. I was born in a basement, grew up in a basement, and I live in a basement now. Some people work at night, many people really, when you think about it. Not many people live in basements. What do you think of when you think of someone living in a basement? I think of myself primarily. My basement is not the basement of a single family house or the dirt-floored, stone-walled space under an old farmhouse. My basement, my general basement, is an urban basement. Not the underside of the city, the space beneath street level. If there are any windows, they are high in the walls and you see people's feet when you look out. Let me tell you 3 stories in which basements figure prominently. First, this story takes place in the basements of 3 medium-sized apartment buildings in Queens, New York, built around 1900. Well-built, nicely proportioned, sturdy buildings with even a few elegant touches. They're essentially lower middle class. In these buildings, the basements are under the rest of the building. There are no elevators. One does not enter the basement from the interior hall. To get into the basement, you go out the door and down a separate flight of stairs to the separate basement door. In addition, there's usually a bulkhead that opens out of the sidewalk. Then there are thousands of similar buildings. There are thousands of similar buildings and therefore similar basements scattered throughout the city in all the boroughs, all built around the same time. The bulkhead doors, wonderful heavy steel with cast patterns on 2 doors. Easy access, so most of them have been altered now, but it wasn't so long ago that they were a real hazard. Store owners and superintendents would open these doors and leave them open on streets crowded with pedestrians. The doors propped open are about 2.5 feet high, easy to walk into and tumble over down into the basement if your attention is focused other than down in front of you. Basements are primarily associated with dirt. I did a small survey once, and it's true. Dirt, dark, damp, scary, smelly, and then there is the most threatening aspect of the basement, who lives in the basement. The inhabitants' characteristics appear more creaturely than personable. Creaturely like rat creatures and bug creatures. To get into this basement, come out of the front door of the building, turn left, walk about 10 feet, turn left, and immediately descend the 5 marble stairs to a dark and somewhat cool and narrow stone passageway with a cast iron gate at the other end. A bare light bulb in the ceiling. You are now removed from the current fashion of whatever time you were existing and connected across centuries. Fashion recedes into a barely discernible background. This is, in fact, a passage to another world, and you know it is, unless you're just getting rid of some garbage. In which case, you have chosen not to see the iron gate not to sense the possibilities of the passage, not to notice the door on your left that actually takes you into the interior of the basement. You've chosen to get away from that place as quickly as you can. But let's say you didn't leave. You stand in front of the old wooden door, not black, but so dark no identifiable color is visible. The doorknob works. The lock has been left unfastened. The door opens quietly and easily on hinges that have been well maintained. Where is the light? It's true, basements on first entering before the light is on are very dark. Pitch black until your eyes adapt. When they do, the string hanging from over the headlight can be seen from the light coming in the door. Pull it, turn around, and close the door.
You just made me remember something about Pat. He's very proud of his carpentry. And one of the funny things that happened when we changed our bathroom into a pantry and changed our pantry into a bathroom, sort of swapped them, as we put in a stained glass window and we had to open up the wall to the outside to do that. And when we opened up the wall, we found a pair of readers sitting on the 2x4 inside the wall. And I said, Patrick worked on our house. All right, well, now Duncan's going to read for us. Duncan Nichols. Thank you.
Duncan, is this where you need me?
Yes, you want to come up and you have a part two.
Okay.
So Patrick, as far as we know, wrote one play. And I think we're just going to read a piece of it, fragment of it. And I'm going to have you both at that podium with this. And it's going to be cold.
Yeah.
But the one direction I'll give you, if I can be...
It's handwritten too.
It's handwritten, so it's cold. And the only direction I'll give you, this is the night shift in a hospital, a psychiatric hospital, night shift. So, you're the nurse, and you are, what's it, Greta? You're Greta.
You're a nurse.
Yeah, so you'll change the pages hopefully in a way that'll be synchronized. And I'll just start with a couple of pages to go in. But, so Pam has all of Pat's stories and writings. And Pam has said that she doesn't, it's hard to collate, get them, like, which are the finished ones and which aren't. Well, I think most of them are finished in a sense, and I would also say most of them are unfinished. And I think that's how writers think, is they don't have a product all the time, they have versions. So that's one thing. And then I wanted to read a fragment of the play, of his play, because this is a theater and he loved his theater. And we did a play here in 2003. He did the lights, but he did a lot of the set. And that was in reaction to the war in Afghanistan. So that was my play. And so I've been here in this building with him a lot. And I just want to say that in this, Michelle read the play about going to the draft board, because he was draft age. And so he refused to go to Vietnam. And instead he went to a hospital and did his, what's it called? CO.
Yeah.
Conscience, okay. So he may have been a rude writer. I mean, he's very rude and tough, but he also had a lot of very sweet sensibilities, as you know. So anyway, I'm just going to read from the middle of the play. But so the only direction is this is at night, working at night in the hospital. And I'll just start in right in the middle of the sentence. Hopefully I won't get confused by the writing. What I mean is...
You mean the script?
The handwriting.
The handwriting. It's actually block lettered mostly, or at least very well. It's both block letters and small letters. That's important, actually. And he also changes. I was reading this other version, and some of it's in prose and some of it's in play form. And So he was working things out by writing in prose, but also in story form and longer form. But so he was a really exploratory writer, and so much more devoted than I thought he was as a writer. But anyway, so he would change names of his characters. So in this play, whose Stanley is Walter, or something in a different version of this play. Stanley has been given the keys. This is called Night Watchman. Stanley has been given the keys to the whole show, to the morgue, the autopsy room, the OR, the kitchens, the pharmacy, and drug storage. But he does not have the key to Unit 5, where one key is needed to enter and a different key to exit. So this is sort of like, I would say, a description of what the characters' motivations are. Outside the units next to the elevator is a Watchman station that Stanley clocks into. He's taken to loitering in the elevator lobby, hoping for a glimpse into the psych unit, and perhaps the object of his attention. As far as Stanley can tell, the gatekeeper, he's the gatekeeper. Not much coming and going in the middle of the night, though. What happened on occasion and this is scroll across down, in Unit 5, was a resident would collect from sheer boredom or malevolence, perhaps, a number of objects, put them in the toilet and flush, and flush, and flush, until the nurse intervened. So it happened one night that the maintenance man could not be found, and Stanley was called upon to contribute his best effort at fixing things. Blackout. Down on reader Stanley, this is the stage direction, standing before double doors of Unit 5. Stanley pushes the bottom of the intercom, waits, pushes again. And the nurse read voice.
Yes,
It's me.
it's you.
Yes, me.
But who are you?
It's me, Stanley. You sent me, the toilet.
Oh yes, you're here to fix the toilet, but one moment. Okay, Stanley, I'm going to buzz you in. Here's the buzz.
Stanley steps back. As the double doors open, the wall rotates 180 degrees. Stanley stands in the opening. As the wall stops its rotation, Stanley steps forward and the doors close behind him. Nurse enter from stage left.
Thanks for coming, Stan. You're faster than expected. We're taking you away from...
No.
Magician, are you? You look puzzled, Stanley. There's nothing in your hands. Yes, empty, no tools, no bucket, no mop.
Well, I need to look first. Just look, see what needs to be done.
I guess it's behind you, down the corridor to...
As Stanley turns, Greta emerges from the shadows. Stanley, yikes, you startled me. Nurse steps across into the audience space. So the nurse would go into the audience. But we're going to need to it. Oh, maybe you should.
Yes, stay here.
So the nurse will now be in the audience. Sorry.
Do you want to watch me kill myself?
Then the nurse says to the audience,
Has Stan been alone with himself too long in the dark?
Nurse, do you think I'm pretty?
no response. Looking
I
at
could-
Stan.
I could strangle myself, watch, with my own hand. Who are you anyway?
Me? I'm here to fix the toilet. Stanley reaches as if to take Greta's face in his hands.
Don't touch me with those hands, Buster. How do I know where they've been? Cleaning toilets?
I was just going to look.
I said, do you you want to watch me kill myself?
Is that why I'm here?
What? You know what you'll find here? Cold porcelain, like the toilets you clean, you disgusting little man.
That's pathetic. What are you fucking nuts? I've taken you seriously. What is the most bizarre, this is a note, I'm not sure what it is, I think it's dialogue. What is the most bizarre voodoo? Taking the subway? Cannibalism in the 21st century? No, love.
By the way, did you tell me your name, or did I forget?
I didn't tell you. It's Stanley. I've been watching you for almost 2 weeks.
Every day?
Actually, every night. At least when we've been in the common room.
Uh-huh.
Tickets, please, tickets.
We gave them to the conductor on the other train.
Again with the conductor. Blackout. Couch comes out, Stan and Greta sit side by side. Lights. Change of voice here.
It's really about passion.
Oh, so it's all about passion on my left and no passion over here?
Sid.
And Stan.
Oh yeah, Stan. If I didn't know how to bank If I didn't know how to bank the stove, Stan, I would have burned the house down a long time ago.
Where was that? Or when?
No doubt about it. And the worst thing, you know what that is? The worst thing is to burn the house down by accident. Christ, can you imagine? Oh shit, I didn't mean to.
Hooks again, right in the chest.
Know what I mean?
Hot. It would have to be hot.
You don't really know what I'm talking about, do you? You delusional, moronic, scumbag idiot.
Well, I said hot, didn't I? You are surrounded by flames, thinking, can't put it out now, too late. That's who I saw. Can't soar towards heaven on charred wings.
There's no buts, Sid.
Stan,
That's why. Don't play with fire.
I like you more than something.
Wow. I hope you're not expecting me to commit to what I mean, to kill myself before you. Oh, in front of you, that is.
Whatever. Do you care to? Stan rises and invites Greta to dance. Music. They waltz.
No, you don't, Sid.
They stop dancing,
I
look at
mean,
each other.
Stan, you don't get to do that. Dance me off the roof.
No.
You don't ever try that again.
Slap Stan. Ooh, cheek hard.
You know what I mean?
No question. Nurse.
Tickets, tickets, please.
They sit back on the sofa. Brief blackout. Greta lies down on the sofa. Stanley stands a few feet away, looking at Greta, who's asleep. How the hell am I supposed to tell them who God is? They don't have a fucking clue. What? As if he had heard a voice. Who my God is. Now, I have to convince them that my God is the same as their God, and my tribe is the same as their tribe, and that we agree. That no one, no matter what, can tell anyone else to kill someone. And then, I can tell you, I love you.
Stan, do you want to watch me?
No, I don't.
Stanley,
What are you doing?
what are you doing? Go to your room. You too, sweetie pie. To your room. Tomorrow is another day.
Blackout.
Rob, why don't you call it a night on that? I think that's good.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rob.
just get to thank everybody because, these stories has been wanting to wake up and be out there and to hear them and to hear Pat's friends read them is just, wherever he is smiling. Yeah. This is a celebration of a gift that he had, and, hopefully we'll be able to put some more get more stories recorded and let them be out there. So,
It's a gift for us too.
Yes, thank you so much for coming.